Welcome to another Simon Says, and it's been an exciting couple of weeks over in England as we've had the British Chess Championships, which has been going on, and probably one of the most strongest ever British Chess Championships. The only player that was missing, really, apart from myself, was Nigel Short of the top players. And everyone else was taking part in it. So you had Micky Adams, David Howell, Gawain Jones, a lot of the top players. And it was also, as well as being one of the strongest British Chess Championships, certainly one of the most exciting. And it went all the way right down to the nail to decide who the winner was. And in the end, it was a battle between Luke McShane, the so-called strongest ever amateur chess player. A lot of people have been discussing whether a 2669 should be classed as amateur, but Luke does really rely on other jobs for money, and the legendary Micky Adams. So they fought in the playoff for the title, which Micky ended up winning, which we'll come to shortly. I was kind of, Micky, they're both great players, both lovely people, and Micky is probably the strongest ever English player of all time. I don't think I could think of a stronger player than Micky. Nigel Short, of course, fought for the World Championships, but that was in 1 year. Overall, Micky has been England #1 for a longer period of time. And Luke McShane has never won the British Championship, so I was feeling a bit for Luke, because he certainly deserves to have won it at some point in his life, and he's going to have to try again another time. But what we're going to do in this show, we're going to have a look at the build-up to the last rounds, and I'm going to take the highlights from the championships. So we're starting in round 2, and we're going to start with a loss that actually Luke had in only the second round. So he did even better to fight back from losing in the second round. It was only a 9-round tournament, so there's not as much time to make mistakes and get back into the tournament. And one of another star of this competition was the player of the white pieces here, David Eggleston, a teammate of mine who plays in Cheddleton team in the 4NCL. David is somehow rated just below 2400. I've no idea why, because he's much stronger than this rating, and he was playing with white pieces here against Luke, so he had something like a 270 point elo difference. David managed to win this game, and he went on to get his 3rd Grandmaster norm. Still quite a young chap, David Eggleston, and of course he needs to get a load of rating points, but incredibly impressive that he's got 3 Grandmaster norms, and he's a lovely chap as well. So let's have a look at how this game went, and we're picking it up from about move 16. From, you can probably tell, a Spanish opening, with both sides, I would say, getting a fairly typical position. Now, the only difference in the pawn structure is that white has transferred his pawn from d3 to c4, and this is something that often occurs when the light square bishops are exchanged on c4. So this is something to bear in mind. So when black plays bishop e6 and white leaves the bishop on c4, black takes on c4 and white takes with a d pawn. So, in the Spanish, I think the most important thing I say the Spanish, this is more like the Italian game, which is more popular at top level now. I think it's really quite important to understand how slight differences in pawn structure, like the pawn going from d3 to c4, make differences. More important than knowing individual moves. And it does seem at top level that most players of the white side, most strong grandmasters, don't actually like this pawn structure as white, and they prefer to do something with a bishop on c4 before allowing black to take on c4 and have to take with a pawn. So they prefer moving the bishop either around to c2 or even to b5 in a lot of circumstances. So this pawn structure, which I would have thought, without knowing much about it, white should be doing quite well, because the half-open d-file, nice control over the central squares here, is actually considered to be totally fine for black. I guess one of the main reasons is black is incredibly solid. The bishop on c5 is a lovely piece, and even if white tries to exchange this bishop off, black can leave the bishop there. So there's not really any way to put pressure on d6. I mean, normally to put pressure on the d6 pawn, white would have to have the pawn break c5. This is made even harder, being the fact that the pawns are on a4 and a5. Why is that? Because white will find it tricky to go b4 and c5, and it's just these little pawn structure differences which do make quite a big quite a big dent on the position. So the game now continues with knight to f5 from white, and of course is the typical move, white trying to generate some attack over here, but black's knights are also quite well positioned to deal with this. And one thing that Luke is a complete master of is defense and maneuvering. Him and Micky Adams have very similar, I would say, styles. They both are masterful maneuverers. They both know where to put their pieces. And in this position, there may well be a threat or something like knight takes g7 and a bishop h6. This is a typical idea. So let's just say you play rook d8. This is a tactic to watch out for when these three pieces are like this. A typical tactic. Not sure if it works here, but let's take a look. Knight takes g7. You have to take with a king in order to defend f6. King takes. And now bishop h6 check. This is the second sacrifice. Very well known theme. King g6 doesn't help. Queen f5. King takes here. Queen takes f6 check. King h5. And it clearly does work because g4 is checkmate. So this is a very common theme that you need to be aware of when you're playing these lines. I mean, it's these little tricks. So important. So queen d8 was played by Luke in order to defend the knight. David Eggleston now could have continued with knight g4. I would have preferred this, but he tried to use his h-pawn in order to create some initiative. So h4. And Luke now put some defensive maneuvers on. King h8. Black is quite solid, so there shouldn't be a way that white can break through. And now g3. Rook f8. King g2. This is a normal idea. Sometimes the rook can come over to h1. And now knight g8. And I like the way Luke defends here. He keeps things very solid. He defends h6. He gets ready to expel that knight with g6. So it's good, solid maneuvering. King h8, knight g8, good defensive play. Combined with the rook coming here. Very nice play. h5, g6. Getting rid of that knight. If it comes in, not a big danger. We can swap it or go king g7. So the knight goes to h4. David tries to keep pieces on. Knight g7. Very, very solid. This forces the h-pawn to make a decision. And really the only decision is to push on, because if you take on g6, Luke has prepared very well for this because he can take back and he's hitting f2. So in this position, excuse me, I'm not sure what happened with the camera there. In this position, h6 was played, and now the knight comes back, and Luke has really done these maneuvers in order to prepare f5. Rook e2, queen f8. There's no reason to rush f5, but this is coming, so I prefer black's position now, because black has this break. White doesn't. Queen g4, and again Luke takes his time. f6, knight f3, queen f7. Again, Luke a very patient player. He's not rushing this move. He's putting his pieces on good squares. Queen h3, rook e8, everything ready for f5. f5 comes. Pawn takes f5, g takes f5, and around here again, black must be better. Luke must have a better position here. He's got a better pawn structure, and he's got chances to break with either e4 or f4. Rook on a to e1, and he now decides to go for f4. So coming down on the f file. And I think here, David's in quite big trouble, but he now does excellently to get some chances. He plays b4, first of all, and after bishop a7, he plays c5. And this is very clever, because he needs to block this bishop in, and he needs to do something. So he's creating as much counterplay as he can. And this is a very good sign that you all need to do. You know, we all need to do when playing. If you want to be strong players, the best way to defend it is by active defense. by playing actively. Active moves. Good active moves. Don't defend passively. Defend actively. Luke now sees no reason not to take the pawn on h6. And here, rook e4 was played, trying to get pressure against f4. And I think it now shows why Luke hasn't, is, as people, I guess, could say, is an amateur player. He's a little bit rusty. This was only round 2. And around here, his tactics were not quite on point. Because he played here. Or was it here? Sorry, it's a little bit later. He played, okay, his next moves were right. Rook g8, hitting g3. Rook h1. Knight g4. All of this is very normal, getting his pieces to good squares. Good play. But after king f1 now, it's around here. Now, of course, there's a time scramble here, but Luke, maybe in round 8, would have spotted the tactic immediately here. In the game, he played the very strange bishop to b8, and this clearly cannot be a good move. There's too many pawns in the way to get that bishop active. And it's far too slow. This is the kind of move you play when there's not any urgency in the position. But here, there is. Because, look, there's a lot of chaos going on around the king side. Luke, I think, in round 8, would have found the tactic bishop takes c5. The point being, after pawn takes, knight takes, we hit the rook on e4. And when that rook moves, we now simply play pawn takes g3. And this now works because there's no rook takes g4. That rook wasn't able to stay on this 4th rank. So, meaning that black is able to capture on g3 because the knight's not on pre. And this really is leading to a winning attack for black. Yes, black is a piece down, but disaster is happening all over the place here on the f-file mainly. For example, if queen takes, there's knight e3 check, winning the queen with an ongoing attack. And if f takes here, then there's simply e4, and this is going to win the piece back with an ongoing attack. So Luke missed this opportunity, and after bishop b8, David Eggleston played amazingly. He took on f4, pawn takes f4, c4, and his bishop now comes to life. Luke misses his last chance. Luke needed to capture on b4 here and try to get... He needed to play something like pawn takes b4 and after a check, knight d4 to try and nullify the bishop. Instead, he played h5 and now white's pieces. You can see this one slow move, bishop b8, is really the downfall of black's play. It just shows you how tempos are so important. They really are. Because now, David, look at white's pieces. Knight g2, brilliant move, clearing up the queen, attacking f4, king h7, pawn takes d6, and now after knight to f6 here, knight e5, white's pieces float in, queen g7, queen f5, check, king h8, and now some nice tactics, rook h5, queen h5, only one move, queen h7, knight f7 check, very forceful play, king g7, and here bishop c3 check is played, and Luke resigned because he's losing his queen, he's losing the game. So very nice game from David. Okay, Luke was probably winning that, but you've got to take your chances in chess. That was only round 2. Now I think the next critical moment in the tournament happened in the next round. It happened in round 3, and Micky got quite a fortunate win. He was playing against another teammate of mine, Tomas Fodor, who lives in London, but he's originally of Hungarian descent. And Tomas Fodor had played a fantastic game to get the following ending, a pawn up against Micky Adams. And this really could have changed the whole tournament. Here, Tomas played queen to c5, which looks natural. This is a very hard ending to win. You know, in order to win this, you need to play amazingly, but the computer does now give the line queen to c6 as a winning line for white, and this does look natural because you gain a tempo. And here white is either going to try to play queen a4 or queen c4, picking up the pawn, and then the win is easy. If you can win the pawn on a4, you're 2 pawns up, it's easy. So king f8 is forced, and now by playing a check on c5, And again, the black king can't move to a light square because there's a check and we win the pawn, winning. So you have to go queen e7. And only now playing queen c4. This should have been winning for white, but this is a very hard line to see. A3, b6, for example, even this is pretty unclear, but after a, the a pawn can't move, and this is winning for white again. And if something like queen a7 here, there's a couple of checks that can help white's position because he has b6 gaining tempo, and now king g3, something like, and this is a winning position, but very, very hard. The way the game actually went was the pawns on b5 and a4 got swapped off, so we had them being exchanged here eventually after some moves in a rather funny way, and we got this ending. And now this ending, 3 versus 2 with the queens on the board, should be a technical draw. And it's actually very amusing, this one, because in practice somehow white actually loses this position quite a lot, even at high level. You should never lose this position with the extra pawn, but the reason white does lose this is because often white has the extra pawn and he pushes extremely hard, and the only way white can try to win this is by moving the king as far forward as possible, taking some risks. It's always a bit risky when there's queens on the board, and white has lost this a lot in practice. It should be a draw. I mean, you should play on as white because you're a pawn up, but it is, of course, a drawn position with the queens on the board and all pawns on the same side of the board. Now, after a number of manoeuvring, it was very tragic what happened. We got to this position. White had placed his king on a very risky square, and around here, Fodor completely collapsed. I mean, there's a bit of danger here. I mean, for example, if you try something like g4, queen e1 check, this demonstrates the danger white can be in. King here, g6 check, king takes here, queen h4, and white is losing, has to give up his queen. But of course, even here, after king f6, white, as long as white doesn't blunder, he's not losing. And he went queen c3 check, and after king f7, he should now play something like g4. Something like this. And of course, this is still a draw, but you can play on. If you can get the pawn to f5, you can try to play a little bit. Tomas made a horrible blunder, which may have affected the whole outcome of the British Championships. He played queen e5. And this is one of the biggest blunders from the British Championships, and a huge blunder from a grandmaster. He throws away half a point, potentially a whole point. Micky now plays g5 check, and Tomas has to resign. Tragic. Because if you play pawn takes pawn, you lose your queen. If you play king h5, queen g6 is not the way to play. Queen h3 is mate in 1. Good thing I saw that, isn't it? So very tragic round 3 for Tomas, and that's just the kind of luck that you need if you're going to win a tournament. I think you do need a little bit of luck, because that was maybe a whole point difference from Micky's final score, but he held in there and he did well. Next game, we're going to go to another star of the tournament. This was again from round 3. This was David Howell versus James Adair. And David Howell I really wanted David Howell to do well and we actually win the tournament. One of the people I wanted to win the tournament. He's a very good friend of mine, and he unfortunately lost the last round, which we come to. In this game, he played the very talented James Adair. They followed a very theoretical Nimzo Indian game. I'm going to blast through the openings. I don't want to spend too much time on any particular one game. And this is, something you might want to study at home. This has all been played before, extremely theoretical. Even this has been seen. And now, again, this has still been seen. E5 is a kind of new move that was played in a correspondence game once before. So James Adair, incredibly well prepared, had this up his sleeve. In the correspondence game, bishop takes e5 was played, but after bishop takes g4, for the piece that was sacrificed, black had fantastic compensation with a rook swinging its way into the attack very quickly, and the white king being stuck in the center. So David decided castle queenside, and now the game gets very interesting, very crazy. Bishop takes c3, and rather than recapturing this, white keeps his strong knight, knight to f5. Incredibly complex. Bishop takes, g takes, queen g4, bishop e3, and now maybe here black misses his chance to play a move like d4. I think he should have gone d4 with just a very unclear game. You know, it's a total mess. In the game, bishop d4 was played, and after a capture and a capture on d5, David gained the better chances. I mean, both very heavy theoretical battle this game. You know, you can go and look at this yourselves at home. But David must be better here. He has one file to attack and nice pawns, but look at the way he finishes it off. Rook c8, king b1, rook d8, and here... And even here, black had been playing quite well, but he now goes wrong. He needed to keep his queen more centralized. Something like queen f5, queen f3, and rook takes d5. With good chance to a draw. He needs to get rid of one of these two pawns. He played queen takes h4 here. And now this is wrong because your queen gets too sidetracked. c6 from white. And now white is able to keep both of his strong pawns. g6, a final mistake. And David now takes on g6 and plays with great energy now. Queen to f5, threatening a very crude attack. Rook g4, rook g1, rook takes g6. But in actual fact, this crude attack is very hard to stop because black is tied down to these connected passed pawns. And I think the combined efforts that white is giving against the black king and against, you know, these pawns queening is too much for black now. It's too much. Too many threats. King g7 and c7. A very nice tactical move. You know, you've got to watch out for these tactics. The point is if rook takes, queen check, picking up a rook. So you can't take that one. So the rook has to move. Rook e8. d6, clearly the position is all over. Rook e6, black desperately trying to hold on. d7 doesn't quite work because you've got rook takes c7, but again David now plays excellently, combining threats against the black king and the pawns queening. Rook f1, queen f7, the big threat. Rook f8, and now what is the killer move here? The killer move is c8 queen, and black resigned, not waiting for rook takes queen, check, and queen takes e6 next. Of course, very simple win at the end. So quite a theoretical battle there. It shows you how important it is to know your theory at this level. You know, it really is when you're playing for the title of your country. You need to know your theory. And in the end, David was victorious with very good play there. Okay, now the next game, which was quite critical, came, I would say, we're jumping to the later stages of the tournament. We're jumping to round 7 out of 9. And up to this point, round 7, Gawain was actually leading the tournament. And he had white against Micky Adams. And he played a pretty good game. I mean, the game went via the Spanish. And Micky is one of the best ever players to play e5, to play the rule Lopez, to play these positions. If you want to learn one e5, you can't go wrong by looking at Micky Adams' games. He's a bit older now, you know, he's coming up to 50, I guess, but he's so experienced with the e5, the maneuvers you need to do, the subtleties. He's so experienced with this kind of setup. He's someone I recommend anyone who wants to learn e5 to look at. Now let's have a look at the opening. Well, we did have the main line rule Lopez, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, castles. And now rather than playing c3, which allows the marshal, I mean, nowadays most players are not playing c3 because the marshal gambit with d5, and I'm sure most of you know this, pawn takes, knight takes, taking here where white wins a pawn, c6 and bishop d6 to come, is really considered a draw. It's kind of considered a draw, and it's considered that black certainly has enough compensation in these positions for the pawn. I mean, theoretically, draw is what people are saying. So, and also you have to know loads of theory. So the anti-marshal, I mean, c3 is the kind of move you want to play because you want to play d4 quickly. But d5 is a move allowed. The anti-martial starts with a4. And the point of this is, after b4, you can try some different maneuvers here. d4 being one of them. And this is one of the current ways that white is trying to get an advantage. And I kind of think after d6, Gawain does get an advantage. Slight advantage, but black is very solid. He takes on e5. Micky tries to swap some more pieces off. When you're playing black against someone like Gawain, a draw is not anything to be ashamed of. But here, white's advantage is trying to be a couple of things. First of all, white has the c4 square, so the knight can often come to this square. It doesn't have to go there. Also, this pawn's a little bit extended. It could be a little bit of weakness. So there's little things like this. Actually, Gawain comes to f3 in the game, and we had some more exchanges of pawns. Okay, it probably is fairly even, but I prefer white's pawn structure on the queen side. These pawns are a little bit easier to attack, but we did have some tactical exchanges happening, and it was around this point here where I think Gawain had played perfectly even up to this point that Gawain now starts to go wrong, and Micky plays fantastically to win with black from this position. It is unbelievable. Gawain plays rook d1. Looks very normal. But he had a much stronger option here. Gawain could have played in this position the very crafty bishop to e3. And had he played this, I feel Micky may have struggled in this game. I don't think Micky would have won. The idea is, if bishop takes a1, this check here is very annoying. You have to play rook d6, only move. And now I can simply take on a1. I guess you play something like rook d8 at some point. I play rook d1. And I feel white should have a better ending here. Slightly better ending. At some point I'm going to take here, and my king can try to rush to this square. Slightly better ending. I really do think that's likely. In the end, rook d1 was played, and Micky now, after playing some good moves, goes on to win this position with some fantastic play. I mean, really, this is high-class technique that black shows in this game. I mean, you can see he wins a pawn here. Gawain has clearly gone wrong, and he goes to convert this victory into win. This is not the kind of position against a top grandmaster you can hope to defend. Against me, you'd have good chances, but Micky, with these pawns, he does get through, and he does, in the end, get victory. His a-pawn proving to be too strong, and this position is easily winning. Very important win for Micky again there with the black pieces against a very strong rival, and that may, I would have thought, have ruined Gawain's chances in the British Championships this year. It was, after this, his chances to win the British were pretty much shot. Okay, now the next game, I want to move on to a game between Chris Ward and Nicholas Pert. Nicholas Pert, both grandmasters. I just wanted to show the end of this game. We spoke about a queen and pawn ending earlier in Tomas versus Micky, and I thought the way that Nick, with the black pieces here, went on to win this ending was quite exceptional, actually. I mean, Nick is an amazing endgame player. I mean, in England, we talk about Keith Arkell, who's another amazing endgame player, as we'll see. But the ability to win endings at this level is so important. It's often a difference between GMs and IMs. All players can play decent openings as long as they learn stuff. They can get into okay middle games, and a lot of people can play good endings, but the ability to win slightly better endings, as Micky did in the last game, is really the difference between being a top player and not. Nicholas here shows how important it is in queen and pawn endings to have the passed pawn. And I just really like the way he wins this. So I just wanted to show the technique he uses. Okay, I mean, the one thing to bear in mind is it's equal material, but having the passed pawn in these positions is interesting. I would also like to note that opening-wise, the opening was my favourite knight to e4 in the Dutch. This line, which I've recommended in the Dutch on a number of occasions. And this is a homegrown idea of myself, I'd say. And it went down one of the theoretical suggested lines that white plays, which is king takes f1. So theoretically, this is quite interesting. Knight to f3, b5, bishop e3, probably a slight error of everything. And I just wanted to get to this endgame position. And you get very, very interesting positions from this opening, as we can see. And Nick, very nicely, I think, gained a nice advantage around here. This is how we got into the ending. But let's go now, jump forwards. How did he win this? Well, he really just was very careful avoiding the perpetual checks, because even here you've got to, you know, queen and pawnings, you've got to calculate so well. This move I thought was a piece of class because it gave him some checks and gave the opposite opportunity to bring the queen back, and he had to calculate all of these checks. Now look at this, you know, Nick, this is great because he had to realize that he had to give up another pawn, giving white 2 passed pawns, but knowing his own pawn was too strong. And another very clever check, if he pushes the pawn too quickly, white has great chances of perpetual. He centralizes the queen, another important motif in queen and pawn endings, keeping the queen centralized, which he does here. And now he pushes, and we can see here calculation was key, and he had calculated very cleverly that eventually he would have this, because the queen's here, a cross check. And this is the important motif. When white checks, the cross check comes. So a nice smooth ending, but there's just 2 points to bear in mind there. Number one is really having a passed pawn is much more important in queen and pawn endings than having an extra pawn. As we can see, these 2 pawns never got going. And also having a centralized queen is often a very good endgame skill to have. Now, talking about endings, that occurred in round 7, so we're getting to the money end of the tournament. We now move on to round 8, and we're going to look at another endgame maestro, Keith Arkell, with the black pieces here. And this to me is very intriguing. Keith Arkell, one of the best endgame players in the world. I don't think there's actually much doubt about that. Even though his rating is only 2400, when it comes to endings, Keith's rook and pawn endings especially, he has a whole world of experience, and he is a phenomenal endgame player. And in this position, he has 3 versus 2. And in practical chess, this is the kind of position that actually arises quite a lot. He's playing James Adair again, high-rated player. And it's just very interesting to see how Keith goes about winning what should be a drawn position. How in this position do you exert as much pressure as you can on your opponent when you have 3 pawns on the same side of the board versus 2, a position that should be a draw? And I think it's just very thematic just to see how he does this. So let's have a look. Well, first of all, he gets his king and rook to the most active squares. So his rook attacks a pawn and his king gets out of the way for his own pawns. And there's no rush. This is the other thing. When you're playing these positions, you don't need to rush. Give your opponent chances to go wrong, because if your opponent defends perfectly, it's probably a draw. Give him a chance to play something like f4, where some weird pawn move which he might regret. But then at some point you have to do something. So what does Keith do? Well, he has to push his pawn, so he has to go f5, giving him chances to go f4 or e4. And it'll be interesting here to see which break he plays, and we'll get to that in a minute. So now he waits, he blocks, so white doesn't have any more checks, so now white has to go on the long side again. So far, white defending well, because you want to keep your rook when you're defending on the long side of the king, meaning you want to have as many squares between the king and your rook as you possibly can in this position. White's doing that because it means you have more checks. So far, so good. Keith goes about his job again, and now he moves his king. And the point being, he's moved his rook to the c file, very clever, because if white does check from the side, at some point there is a block with a rook. So this is quite a useful technique that black often has. So white decides, okay, I'm just going to stop your king getting active, normal move. And here we see f4 played. The only way to try and win this, I mean, when I was looking at this, I thought Keith might try some plan with e4, rook f3 and e3. But this never works because white can always put his rook on e8. So it's interesting to see that Keith does now exchange another pair of pawns And we now get 2 versus 1. And this really should be draw. How on earth do you win this? It's amazing. Let's see. Well, he moves his king. And now he gets the pawn to f3. And I think this is the important thing. Trying to put your opponent's king on the worst square possible. And he now is able to do that. And again, he uses this little technique of getting the king around. And the real mistake that white's allowed is this check to f1. Because when he avoids the checks, we see he eventually wins the second pawn. And even here might even be a draw. But white has lost that key pawn. So what did white do wrong there? You know, it happened so quickly. And what did black do right? Well, the first thing that black did right was this f3 check. And this now, combined with the rook coming here, was really the winning idea, because black's going to win the f2 pawn. So it just shows you, if you keep trying and trying, you can get there. But it really, you know, white should never allow this f3. I mean, white's rook g8 move, to me, looks like a key error around here. Rook g8, not correct. We want to try and give our rook as many checks. I mean, rook g8 might not even be the losing move. After king f5, this king e2 is far too slow. But this is very crafty king f5 move, because the king's trying to come in here. So, you know, even here it's not easy. But I think he should have played rook, something like rook e8. Something like this. Because what you do, you wait until f3 is played. And as long as it doesn't come with check, now you can check the king. And this is the way to probably draw. Because the black king doesn't have any way into the position. For example, if it tries to go this way, it can't come to g3. If it tries to go any other way, it's not going anywhere because it can't come into f3. So I think this is the key mistake. King e2, allowing f3 with check. In this position, if white had just waited, how does black make any progress? He can check. Okay, I come king e1. And I'm just waiting for you to go f3, and then I keep checking. So it was a big mistake there from James Adair, but Keith got there in the end with his typical endgame masterful play. So Keith Arkell, another player who had a good tournament. Now we come to a very key game from the last round. Going into this round, David Howell was in joint first with Micky Adams, and he had the white pieces. And the game, well, he had this, you know, the game he had here was a key game. He had the white pieces. If he'd have won this one against Luke McShane, he would have been British champion. If he'd have drawn this game against Luke McShane, he would have got to the playoffs. So this game must have been heartbreaking for David Howell, but Luke McShane played fantastically well. So the game started off with the Spanish, and now Luke playing the Steinitz opening. Quite a double-edged opening, something that Luke had obviously prepared for this tournament. We now see one of the main lines where white plays d4, and we have some simplification with a lot of pieces coming off. And this kind of position, I've always thought that white should be a little bit better. White has more space with the pawn on e4. Black is a bit cramped, but it's very interesting to see how Luke plays this. Normal moves occur. Knight c3, bishop e7. And here, well, b3 is another way to play. The bishop does look better on b2. And this has been played by Demchenko. And one game here went like so, with white now playing a nice little maneuver to try to get the knight here. And again, I prefer white's position here. White has a little bit of pressure, but black is very, very solid. And black got this move in. And this was a key idea, which maybe white should not have allowed, because as soon as the queens come off, black has got fuller quality. So David picked another setup. He went for bishop f4, which is fine. And when I was watching the game here, queen c6 was an interesting idea of Luke's, with the idea of trying to reroute with knight d7 and bishop f6 at some point. But I kind of didn't really understand the next move. This had been seen before, because if black ever plays the knight to d7, your knight can come into d5. And I didn't really I'll be honest, totally understand this queen c6 move. And I kind of figured here, well, David must be slightly better, and David must have time here to go about doing some simple maneuvers, like, you know, just improve the position, like rook e1. Looks normal. I was very tempted with rook d3 here, with two ideas. One is to come over to the king, well, three ideas. One's to come over to the king side with, you know, some annoying pressure over here. The second idea is to potentially come to c3 at the right moment because the queen is there. And the third idea is maybe just to, you know, triple on the d file at some point. That could be very useful. So I was quite surprised here when David played knight d5, because simplifying pieces when you have space is something you normally only do when you're totally sure that the simplification is going to be in your favor. Because normally when you have more space, this is a key moment here, you want to avoid simplification because it's much harder for your opponent to move when your opponent's cramped, number one. And also, white can always wait with knight d5. There's no need to rush this move. Why do you rush this move? Just wait with this move. You don't need to throw the knight into d5. You can wait, you know. So it seemed a little bit last round nerves here. We now had an exchange on d5, and Luke now again played very well here. From this moment on, I think Luke played exceptionally. This was a brilliant last round game from Luke, showing how cool a customer he is. Because, you know, a lot of players would go queen d7 here and admit they're slightly worse. They're slightly worse because they're cramped. White has more space, and these pawns are on dark squares. They might be attacked later on, but active defense is best. Queen takes c2, rook c1, and now rook takes c7, bishop f6, and this had all been seen before. This had all been theory, even up to this position with rook e8. But I think here black is at least okay, and I really like the way Luke's played this. He's going now for maximum activity. He has opportunities to come into position, and white's only hope is to take one of these pawns, but he never really has time to do that. He never has the opportunity to do that. I mean, let's see what happens if he tries to take one here. Surely something nasty is going to happen. If he goes bishop takes here. What nasty move? Well, isn't bishop g5 the move to play? Is this going to be the winning move, bishop g5? I'm just trying to work out what the best way to do this is. I haven't actually looked at this. Why not bishop takes d6? Oh, because queen takes d5. Back ranker. There we go. Simple. Nice and simple move. Queen takes, queen e1. And why can't you take on b7? Let's have a look at this. Well, simply just a queen b1 check and then rook e1. So it's yeah, this to me looks quite good for black already. I mean, h3 was played. You have to give your king an escape square, and h5. And unbelievably, this position had all been seen before, and it was a game between two French players in 2004 where now rook takes b7 was played, but after king h2, rook e1 led to a winning attack. And again, okay, white has won a pawn in these positions, but it takes so many moves to queen your pawn, and the black king is so safe on h7, and there's too many threats here. So I think David's preparation let him down here, and maybe this, you know, Luke also, look at the way he finishes his game off. b3 played, and now g5, such an excellent move. The black king is going to be very safe on any of these squares, and David is now on the back foot, seriously. I mean, I do think the next move is again a slight mistake. I think that now David should have realised that it's time to simplify. I don't want to be too critical of David's play because it's such a hard position to play. He played bishop e3, but I think he should have gone for bishop takes d6. Trying to angle for something like rook d8, bishop b4, rook takes d5. When I still prefer black, because I think white has some more tactical problems here. But I think exchanging pawns off, when you realise you're worse, you've got to change the way you think, and you've got to aim for simplifications when you know you're worse. And I think David, who obviously really wanted to win this game, to win it outright, you know, he should have tried to think for simplifications, but not easy to do by any means. Because in the game, keeping the d pawns on the board, as we will see, allows, first of all, rook e5, And after rook takes b7, rook takes d5. Now, this b pawn is a long way from queening, but black's now got his rook to a very nice square. Ideas are coming to the back rank. This next move's quality, bishop e5, improving the bishop. Black is playing fantastic chess. Rook b4, queen d1. Black comes in with a checkmate threat on d1. Here, white needed to play g3, but this is an ugly move to play, and black is clearly better here. In the game, f4 was played, a drastic way to stop back rank checkmate. And now queen e2. Luke playing so actively. Rook to d1. Every move black is playing is maximum activity and really grinding down the position now. King h2 is forced. And now Luke opens it up. Pawn takes f4. And again, what is the most active move here? Rook d2. A great move. Rook d2. Threatening queen takes g2. Checkmate. I mean, how do you defend here? I you know, it's extremely hard to defend. The thing is, black's king is actually very safe, always on g7. So any check, so what? I go king g7, and you're not going to get to my king. If you try to defend g2 passively with something like queen g1, well, worst case scenario, I can go. Let's have a think about this. I mean, this should be, of course, good. I'm thinking about taking and going queen e5, which might be the way to do this. Can I just take and go queen e5, attacking your rook? The only move I can see that white has here is queen here. And surely this is somehow winning, because you're pretty much in zugzwang here. Can I play h4, holding that square, and then go rook d4? I mean, another simple move I could do is going to be rook takes a2, which is winning because the pin, the white king is weak, and I have a passed d pawn. This is another simple way to win. So David now played queen to c6, and when I was analysing this live on my Twitch channel, go and check it out, twitch.tv/gingergm. You can go and look. There's many videos up there. You know, I was analysing this with my friend, International Master Adam Hunt, and even here, we couldn't see a complete way for black to win. But the next move, again, is just pure class. We were trying to force the issue. So, for example, we were looking at moves like d5, trying to block the queen over here. But then we realised here, well, no, this doesn't work. It's simply queen e8. And in this position, this check is very important because I've lost control of e5. If I go king h7, queen takes f7 check, and of course white is the one winning. And if I go king g7, there's simply queen takes e5 check. I move my d pawn. So we can't go d5. So I was thinking, what else can you do here? Well, what about if we take the bishop and try queen e5 again? Then we saw that, okay, well, white has queen check and queen takes f7. So again, we've you know, white is the person winning. So we were thinking here, this is really quite a tough position. And Luke's next move is pure class. I think this is a move that a lot of players under 2400 would just not see, and it shows great understanding. Well, maybe I'm being a bit harsher, maybe that's not fair, but it's a great move. I mean, the thing here is that white always has these checks, as we've seen in all those variations, normally on e8, that are saving him. And Luke just played king to g7 here. And this is just a very nice slow move. When it looks like you should be forcing the issue, this is a fantastic move, because now d5 is an idea. You have to watch out for queen h6. But now certainly other ideas such as bishop takes f4 and queen e5 come into play. And you just avoid all these checks. And what does white do? White can't do anything. If white takes on e5, queen takes e5, and this king will not survive. It will get mated. So it has to come back. Something like check here, check, king f3, and well, you know, there must be a mate. Is there rook d3 and queen e5 checkmate? Looks good enough. Check, only move here. Queen e5 checkmate, for example. So king g7 is just such a quality waiting move. And the reason I say this is so important, if you're a lower rated player, why is this move so important? I think the biggest problem that lower rated players have is getting too concentrated on their own moves and not considering what their opponents are trying to do. And in order to play king g7, you really have to understand all of your opponent's options, and this move is just cutting them out and pretty much putting white in nearly a zugzwang position. And lots of players, lower rated players, do not think like this. They're always trying to force the issue, take the bishop, d5, as I was trying to do, to be fair. But understanding that, hang on a minute, if those ideas are not working, what is my opponent trying to do is such a key concept. And if you can work out that white hasn't got anything he can do, then king g7 is brilliant. Brilliant idea. So a3 was now played, and again, this just shows that white can't do anything active. Okay, so it gets the pawn off the thing, and now black again shows that he has complete domination. Pawn to h4, clamping down on g3. Rook c4 was played. David trying to get the rook back in the game. David Smurden on Twitter pointed out that rook a4 can even be met by a5 here, and funnily enough, white is in zugzwang. It's quite unbelievable. White has run out of moves. The queen has to stay defending here. If you try queen e4 to try to get some queens off, bishop takes f4, you can no longer take your rook. Queen takes g2 mate. What else can the white queen do? Let's look at white's pieces one by one. Queen f3, I take it, I win the queen. Well, I mean, if the queen goes to b7 or a8, okay, you can do that, but now black will do what he does in the game. Maybe he has something. Well, no, he has stronger. He can play d5 now, because with the queen there, the queen could come to h6, but it can't anymore. So this is another problem. When the queen moves away from the 6th rank, d5 happens, and then there's no way to stop queen takes g2 checkmate. So the queen can't move. What about white's rook? Well, the white rook can't move to e4. Queen takes g2's checkmate. It can't take on a5. Bishop takes f4. There's only one other square the white rook can move to, c4. And we will see what happens in the game when this occurred. So you can't move that one. So what else can white move? It's unbelievable. He can't move the bishop, because if you take on e5, we have the same kind of checkmate as we saw before, with the white king being forced out into the open, and there's no way that this king will ever survive. There should be some way to checkmate, and I'm just showing you one variation, one way to checkmate, but it's never going to survive like that. So you can't move the bishop, and it's one of those positions, quite amazingly, where white is just in zugzwang. So it's really funny and fantastic play by Luke. And again, this just shows high level. Think what your opponent's trying to do. Even in a position where it looks like you should be forcing things here, it's actually white. You're just waiting for white to make the mistake here. And a lot of, this is really high level chess. In the end, rook c4 was played, and now it's a very nice finish. Queen e3, putting the pressure on this square. And we need the pawn on h4, because there's only one way to defend the bishop. Queen e4, and now can you see the finish? Beautiful finish. Queen to g3 check, forcing checkmate, and this was the last move of the game. Obviously, David Howell going to be very upset after this, but fantastic win by Luke. Point being, bishop takes, pawn takes, king, checkmate on the back rank. Probably one of the games of the tournament, that one from Luke, and it happened the last round. Heartbroken for David, but that got Luke into the playoffs. So let's quickly look at the playoff games now. So the playoff games, there were some critical moments. Now, Luke McShane, first of all, this is the second game. We'll go to the first game first. The first game, typical Micky. Micky in the playoff games played amazingly well. He kept his cool so well. Luke McShane is a fantastic rapid and blitz player, but this is the first playoff game, and it started again with pretty unassuming Italian game. Micky, like I say, is such a master in these positions. This a4, a5 is the trendy stuff, and now we had normal maneuvering, and the first key moment, I think, occurred around here. Luke probably should have taken with a pawn. He wanted to keep things simple. He took with a queen, and now an excellent move from Micky. As soon as the pin has been broken, not quite the diagonal I was looking for there, black may be trying to move the knight h5. So, you know, Micky takes that knight off, but with a very serious idea of trying to annoy the pawn on a5. So if queen takes f6, knight c4 is surprisingly hard to deal with the queen coming to b5. Really is. So Luke tried to take on b3, but now Micky gains the advantage of the pawn structure. And this is something which haunts Luke for the rest of the game. And look at the way Micky plays this. He's so good at manoeuvring pieces. He moves the knight. First of all, he finds a better square for this knight. He doesn't rush with knight h4. He plays it now. Black has to cover that square. And then knight c4. Luke plays a good active move, b5. But he still gets ground down bit by bit in this position. Rook b6 is such a quality move. I was thinking rook b7 and knight f5. But again, this shows high-level thinking. What is Black trying to do in this position? Black is trying to get this bad knight potentially to d4. And rook b6 stops that move and it attacks. And little by little, Micky just grinds Luke down with fantastic play. And now a quality move, h4. And this forces the Black king to come back. And the rest is actually quite easy. We enter into a simple ending where White is 2 pawns up. And this finish is fantastic. This Black king in these positions needs to be on g7. But it can't get there in time. a7, threatening a check and promotion. King f7 tried. And now a typical skewer, rook h8. The pawn queens, or we go rook h7. This is one very basic ending, actually. I think most people learn at a young age. So Micky took the win. Now, in the second game, it looked like Micky wouldn't go to the 5-minute playoff. I'm not going to show the 5-minute playoff, which actually was Micky played very well and won. We're going to dive now to a position around here where Micky had the black pieces, and all he needs to do was draw this game, and he missed his first opportunity here, Black to move. He played rook d2. He could have played rook takes h3. And of course, they're both in time trouble. But the idea is, after queen in, rook d2, and White has to give up the queen, the rook has to move, bishop to this square. There's no way to stop this check with immediate ending of the game. So that was the first opportunity that Micky missed. But then he played very simply. White had to win this game, by the way, in order to stay in the playoffs. That's why White take risk. And Micky got absolutely trapped. I mean, Luke was so crafty. In this position, pawn takes rook should be winning, because you just take here. Queen takes rook looks like a good move. And now look at this. All of a sudden, knight d6 was played. And out of nowhere, Micky is lost. Because if a rook takes b4, queen to a2, and there's no way to stop the queen with devastation coming in to f7. And it's unbelievable. This is a right turnaround, a right swindle. For example, king g7, queen f7 check, king h6, and with an idea of knight s7 coming, Black is in a mating net. It's quite phenomenal. Queen d2, and now this one, nice little idea, coming to g4. If g5, the queen will eventually find its way in somewhere. So this is a real turnaround, and the game went on, but really in this position it's pretty hopeless for Micky, and Micky lost this game. Now he probably should have played queen takes in this position, queen takes c5, but this would be a losing ending. This was the last, just to show you how this is losing. I think the easiest way to win would have been rook b1 here, and then after b4, then rook a1. So you stop bishop d2, something like b3 here, 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 and I'm going to win the pawns, win the game. So Luke did fight back, but in the end, Micky won the 5-minute play. Very deserved winner of the British Championships. I feel very sorry for Luke. Chess is a very harsh game. It sometimes has very harsh results. Unlucky Luke. Hopefully you'll have another year to win it. But Micky, at his age, to win it. Incredible chess play by him. And he was a real fighter. He deserves the championships. Well done to you, sir. Thank you for watching this, Simon Says. That is my roundup, of course, on the British Championships. And I'll be back again next Monday with a pre-recorded show then. Bye.